Get my 6. Guys, it is an absolutely beautiful afternoon here on the homestead. Doing the video a little bit early today because I am procrastinating, and you'll have to forgive me if I seem a little stuffy and snuffy right now. The yellow ragweed is in full bloom this time of year, and it always makes my eyes water, makes me get clogged up. And I went mountain biking this morning for almost an hour on a new loop I discovered. I thought I knew all the beautiful loops around here, but I found a new one, and it was just fields of this stuff everywhere. So anyway, I'm kind of procrastinating. I'm supposed to be down here splitting up some of this ginormous oak. And I'm going to get to it, potentially. But just listen, you hear how peaceful it is out here? And I thought, I should just make a video because I may or may not have seen what appeared to be something creeping around through this meadow. I don't know if you can tell from this angle, but some of those trees back in there are really big now. We've got 10, 15 feet tall trees in there. And the brush itself, which we're going to let the canopy of the trees kill out once they fully mature, is like 5 feet tall. So there could be someone or something in there creeping around. And if you don't see their movement, you never know it. So let's keep our eyes open back there. Keep getting my 6. I wanted to share this beautiful afternoon with you. Tell you a story, because when we do this, we may potentially have visitors creep up behind us to listen. So I'm going to tell you about a pretty big lie I told one time, and it's terrible. I mean, I finally fessed up to it at the end, but it was a good one. These were just the random thoughts that were going through my mind while I'm sitting out here enjoying this peace, listening to the cicadas, watching for potentially Bigfoot Sasquatch up there creeping out of the woods into my meadow, and procrastinating, splitting firewood. But I remember just strange things people say sometimes, and sometimes they have an effect on me. Like, I think maybe it's funny or interesting, and so I'll repeat it, but I don't always get the same effect when I do it. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I used to be a cashier. I've had so many, jobs. This is back when I was in college. I would work midnights from 10. I worked from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. in a convenience store as a cashier, and then I went to class during the mornings, and then I slept in the afternoon. I did that for about 6 months. Oh, it was tough. But hey, what do they say? Working your way through college builds character. Whatever. It sucked. But I remember I was a cashier, and this guy comes in, and I ring him up, and the total was something like $19.64. So I said, 1964. And he says, wow, that's the year I was born. I was like, really? And he said, no, I wish. I was looking at him, and this was 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And the guy was probably born in 1934. But I don't know, I got a kick out of that. So I'll do that every now and then. I'll repeat that, but it just doesn't work for me. Like, I'll go to the grocery store, and they'll ring me up, and they'll say, 128.56. And I'll be like, wow, that's the year I was born. And they just look at me like I'm crazy. So, I don't know. That guy, he must have had a better delivery than me. And then I also remember, years ago, like if I'd go to the store during the day, maybe on lunch break. This is back when I used to was a financial planner. So you could tell I was at work. I was working that day because I was wearing a suit and a tie, and wow, did I hate that too. Guys, look at me. I'm wearing a t-shirt and shorts. And by the way, my beautiful bride Dearly, aka Giggly Girl, cut my hair today. She did an okay job, no? I told her don't cut it all off like she usually does because I'm actually trying to grow it back out. So anyway, I would be, going to get into the checkout line, And so many times there would be like a person of retirement age there, and they'd see me, and they'd see that I was obviously dressed for work that day, and they'd say, "Go ahead, young man." I'm like, "Are you sure?" And they go right on ahead. I'm retired. We're in Virginia. I'm done retired. I'm like, "Oh, okay, thanks." Well, I've tried that too, and I tried this here one day last week, and it just didn't work for me. But I don't know, pretty good story came out of it. So I'm at the grocery store, and here comes some guy behind me. He's about my age, mid-40s, maybe a little bit older, and he's wearing a suit. So I stepped off to the side, and I said, go ahead, get in front of me. He's like, "You sure?" I said, "Oh, sure, yeah, I'm done retired." And he just looked at me, and his eyes like filled with rage. He said, "Retired from what?" And I was like, because I never asked those older people what they were retired from. So I didn't know what came next. So I'm like, "Well, I'm retired from working, of course." And he said, "How? You're not old enough. You don't look old enough to be retired." And it's like he was getting angry. Maybe because he's not retired, or maybe he didn't believe me. I mean, I still work. I'm working right now. Making this video is like a lot of work. But I love it, so it doesn't feel like I work. I love what I do now, social media, writing. And by the way, FYI, Bigfoot Sasquatch Files Volume 4 is looking like it's going to be available in print and Kindle before the end of September. Okay? And, of course, the link to my books is in the description box below. Go get October Nights. It's great. Looking forward to reading you some of those stories here real soon. So anyway, I told the guy I'm retired. He's like, "Well, what kind of work?" I was like, "Oh, I just did different things." He's like, "Do you have a pension? You don't look old enough." I'm like, "No, I don't have a pension." He goes, "What, do you get a check from the government? Did you get hurt on the job and you get compensation?" And I'm like, "No." "Did you sue somebody?" "No." "Did you win the lottery?" "No." "Are you a trust baby?" It's like he was just grilling me. And I thought, man, what's up? This guy must just be having a bad day or something. Maybe I said it wrong. It was always so those when it happened to me, the delivery was better, I guess. My delivery sucks. Like when they tell me, "Hey, your total's 128.57," I'm like, "That's the year I was born." And they just stare at me. They don't say, "Really?" Well, it's crazy. So anyway, I said, "All right, look, I'll tell you how I retired if you want to know how I retired. But it's kind of like a long, boring story, and you probably have better things to do." He goes, I want to know right now how you can afford to be retired at your age." I was like, okay. And so I made it all up as I went along, okay? I said, "Look, I started working when I was 15 years old." And that's true. Okay, that part's true. I was a lifeguard at the public pool where I grew up, and I did that every summer for like 7 summers. And so I'm telling the guy, I had an older cousin. He was considerably older than me, 10 years, which now at my age, that's not considerable, but back then it was. And we looked up to this guy because he was, considerably older than us, and I think he played football. But he went off to college, graduated, and he became a stockbroker. So when I was 15 years old, I'm telling this guy, working at the pool in the summer, he'd come by the pool every now and then, and he'd just talk to us about investing because he was, working as an investment manager, and this was like in the mid-1980s, and he was really into his job, and he showed us these mountain charts. And I remember this from my days, of course, of being a financial planner. Like if you start at 25 years old and you put $100 a month every month into an investment such as a mutual fund, blue chip, or growth fund that averages 12% per year in returns, which is doable. There's some really good funds out there that have done that for a long time, 50 years or more. And you do that $100 a month every month until you're 65 years old. Okay, that's a 40-year period, and you only put in something like, let's see, it's $1,200 a year, 12,000 times 4. It's like 48,000. Okay, that you put in principal, but at compounding 12% returns over 40 years, it grows to be $1.2 million. That's an actual number. Okay. And if you wait until you're like 45, you wait 20 years later, you've got to put in like $2,000 a month and get the same returns over the next 20 years to get the same amount of money there by the time you're 65 as you could have done by only doing $100 a month when you're 25. And that's true. That's all true. And so I told this guy this, and my cousin was saying this, and so I said to him, I said, you know what? I'm only 15. What happens if I just do $100 a month now like that? And my cousin told me, he says, you'll be able to retire when you're 30. Seriously. And he said, you got to have what's called a custodial account because you're a minor, you're under 18. He said, go talk to your parents, they'll hook you up and all that. So I did that, I'm telling the guy, and I put half of everything I ever earned into these mutual funds. And when I went to college, I got to go to college on a tuition waiver because I was really good at track. I was a miler in high school, and I ran the 5,000 and 10,000 meters in college, so I didn't have to worry about paying for college. But when it wasn't track season, I actually would work. Like I would wait tables mostly because I got some big tips, and I made more money doing that than if I would have gotten a minimum wage job somewhere. And by the way, when I was a lifeguard back in the 80s, minimum wage was $4.85 an hour. That's how much I worked for back then. And man, does that make me feel old, and the wind's blowing in my direction. Tell you, that ragweed is taking its toll on me. So anyway, the guy, you just see his face like, hey, he's hanging on every word, and I'm like, wow, this one's pretty good. I got to keep going with this. So I was like, well, so when I'm in college, it was in the early 90s, and my cousin told me, he said, look, that's great you're doing this mutual fund thing, but there's all these tech companies that are going to do really well because everything's changing. The way we do business is changing. There's this thing called the internet. It was new back then. He's like, look, you've got like $10,000 in your mutual funds. He says, why don't we split it up 4 ways and go with like Microsoft stock, Cisco stock, Intel, and I don't know, I picked another one, maybe IBM, whatever. I just whipped off 4 of the biggest tech things, and the guy's like, I said, so we did that, and I just kept putting my $100 a month in the mutual funds, get that going again. And so anyway, I got out of college in the mid-90s, and I never even thought of my money because I didn't need it. I've always lived below my means. I've always been thrifty. So anyway, around the year 2000, my cousin calls me and he's like, do you ever look at your statements? I'm like, sometimes. Why? He goes, do you realize you've got like $6 million worth of these tech stocks from where you put $10,000 back in here back in like 1992 or whatever? And I told him, and the guy in the grocery store is like, he's like this by now. I'm like, yeah, well, and I told my cousin, I told the guy, I just, trained myself not to think about it because I was always afraid I might touch it. I might sell it off and maybe start living large, You see that back there? Due 6 o'clock. Looks like it just ducked back behind the tree right there. A tree line. Potentially Bigfoot Sasquatch coming down here for some financial investment advice. Okay, so anyway, where were we? 1990s. Well, my cousin recommended that we sell because he felt that everything was overvalued. Prices were too high. They'd gone up too fast. And he's like, you put 10 grand in here and you got like 6.6 million. Just, do it. I was like, okay. So we sold. Had to pay a lot of taxes, capital gain taxes. Like almost half of it went to taxes. But he said, he says, you might want to put some money into real estate. I didn't know anything about real estate. And he said, look, when these financial markets crash, real estate's going to continue to boom for just a while. And so I told the guy, put all this money into real estate. And then my cousin called me again a few years later and he said, look, there's some hokey pokey going on with these mortgage companies. They're lending money to people that they know cannot pay it back. And they're in bed with the appraisers, the mortgage lenders and the appraisers are buddies. And there was so much conflicts of interest in real estate before they overhauled the way it worked there after the mortgage crisis in 2008. Somebody wanted to sell their house or buy a house. Say they needed to get $400,000 because they wanted to buy the house, but the house was only worth 320. Well, the mortgage lender would call his buddy, the appraiser, and say, hey, go out there and appraise this house at $400,000 so we can get this guy the money. And that was going on. So real estate prices got overinflated. They were lending money to people that would never pay it back. They just couldn't. And, remember the ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages? That's how they really got a lot of people hooked. You know, the first 5 years of your loan, you only have to pay like $700 a month, but it's all interest and no principal. And then after 7 years or 5 years, whatever the term on it was, they would readjust the rate based upon current interest rates at the time. Well, when they were doing this, interest rates were at historic lows for the time, not as low as they are now. But long story short, all the rates went up. So when everybody had their ARMs readjusted, their $700 a month mortgage on their $400,000 a month house, which really should have a mortgage like $2,500 a month, well, it jumped up to $2,500 a month. And these people couldn't afford to pay them. And so they were getting just foreclosed on, and everybody remembers that mess. So I'm telling the guy at the grocery store, we got out of that just in time too. And, we only had about $3.5 million left after we paid all the capital gains on those stock sales. But we put it in real estate and we mortgaged, we didn't, we leveraged quite a bit, but got out in time, and we turned that into like 12 million or something like that. So I'm looking at the guy and I'm like, so look, dude, I just don't work. I mean, I got some really good advice when I was 15 years old. I acted on it, and so I just don't work. I'm retired. So feel free to go in front of me here in line. You look like you're working, and maybe like you might even hate your job. You're a little frustrated. Go ahead in front of me. And he goes, that is one of the most amazing stories I have ever heard in my life. I said, really? Maybe I should write that. But I'm thinking, it's not creepy though. There's no like paranormal things in it. There's no potential Bigfoot Sasquatches. And he says, yeah, I would. I'd write that. You should like write a book about how you did all that. Call it like How I Retired at 30 or something. Publish it as like nonfiction. That could really help people. I'm like, oh, well, I can't do that. Thought I heard a tree knock. And he's like, why not? I said, because not a word of anything I just told you is even remotely true. So see, I mean, I lied, but I fessed up to it there at the end. And so anyway, he just turned around. He went to another line to check out, like 5 rows down, and he kept his back to me. He never spoke to me again, but someone or something just threw something at me. Did you hear it hit the ground? It's like a rock or something. Maybe it was a tomato. Maybe he, she, it, or they just threw a rotten tomato at me for that stinker of a story I just told. They're like, oh man, why'd you have to ruin it by saying it wasn't true? Okay. That massive oak firewood over there isn't going to split itself, so I guess I'd better get to work. Potentially. Thanks for being here for another episode of the PBS the Potential Bigfoot Sasquatch Show.